Hey guys, welcome to the MedBoys Podcast. My name's Nimit, and I'm here with Rushil and Naman, who are the co-hosts at this podcast. Our special guest for today is Harsh Parikh, who's a fourth-year medical student at the University of Toronto, which is one of the hardest universities to get into in the entire world. He's gotten numerous awards, countless scholarships, and a bunch of honors, and it's truly a privilege to have him on the show today. How are you doing, Harsh?
Hey guys, thanks for having me. That was a great introduction. I'm not sure if all that's true, but thank you. I appreciate it. I'm doing well. Just came back from a busy hospital shift, so happy to be here.
I can tell that you're a little tired, Harsh.
It's that obvious, huh?
Yeah. Anyways, we'll get straight into the questions. So, like Nimit said, you've done a lot of stuff. So, could you quickly go over the stuff that you did in university that you thought were good for yourself, or maybe helped you get into medical school, or made you a better doctor today in the future?
hmm For sure. So I guess a lot of people watching are probably in undergrad right now, and I'll just talk a little bit about the things that I did in undergrad. So I know a lot of people say like, oh, you have to do certain types of extracurriculars, like you have to do research or you have to do some hospital work. And I think there's there's no one specific thing that everybody has to do, but I think it's a all-rounded balanced application. Like for me, someone was like, oh, you have to have a passion in something. And I always found it hard because I never had like just one thing that I had deep passion about. But for me, like I was more like a well-rounded applicant, I feel. Um, so some of the things that I did was in the summer times, I tried to do a little bit of research. I applied for this NSERC undergraduate research scholarship. And so I did a little bit of research every summer through that. And I think that's something that I would recommend doing a little bit of research. And then I was really involved at UTSC. So I went to UofT Scarborough for my undergrad. And there I did a lot of teaching in chemistry. I think my main passion was in teaching organic chemistry, FSG. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but like facilitated study groups. Um, so that's one thing that I think uh, that was strong in my application is my teaching side. Um, then a few other things like I joined some clubs. I did a little bit of hospital work as well. Um, so I all of that put together, I think made for a good application. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I heard you did a lot of research over the summer, like you said, but
Mhm.
recently, due to the pandemic, a lot of scientists and recruiters they haven't been taking students in, mostly undergraduate students because they have less to no research experience. So, do you have something to say to the undergraduates who are kind of struggling to get more opportunities like that?
Yeah, for sure. So I know research is tough right now. Some of my own projects with supervisors are put on hold because of COVID. So for sure, it's not an easy time. What I recommend is to still continue to try to look for research opportunities. Like, don't let that be a barrier. But at the same time, don't be too hard on yourself either if you're not able to secure something. Um, a lot of schools are very understanding in that sense. I think there's also a lot of pressure all the time about like getting a publication and having your name on a paper, and that really makes you stand out. I personally didn't have a publication at the time that I got into medical school, so it's certainly not necessary. What they care more about is that you're enrolled in a project and you maybe that you're interested in research and you have that side of you that's curious and like tries to answer a question and delve deeper. And the way we advance science and all of that, like just showing an interest in research is good. Obviously, a publication is like cherry on top, but it's okay if you don't have that. And specifically around COVID, like there are certain other projects that are prioritized at this time. So even if your project is put on hold or it's difficult to find opportunities, don't worry. Like you can focus on other avenues where you can get involved at this time, right? There's no specific scripted formula of how to get in. And the other thing is admissions committees are probably going to be a little bit more lenient, given that this pandemic has affected so many. So I think you don't need to worry too much about that. I think there's other ways to get involved. And yeah, just focus on that.
So moving from your actual application to your first year in medical school, how was the jump? What kind of things did you start learning that you never really expected that you would learn in first year?
Yeah, for sure. So I actually think the first year of medical school, or once you enter medical school, you learn so much of the things that you've really been wanting to. I feel like, at least for me, I felt like undergrad, I was learning a lot of basic science. A lot of things that I didn't really want to know about. I wanted to learn about the human body. I wanted to learn about diseases. It's not, I didn't want to learn about genetics or things like that. Nothing against those subjects, but so I really thought that getting into medical school, I was finally like, wow, I'm learning about how to save lives, how to take care of patients. All of these things that you've been set out to, you're finally doing that after like 4 years of rigorous undergraduate studies. You're finally doing that. So it's definitely a lot of fun, more enjoyable. And because it's more enjoyable, the time goes by without you like stressed out all of the time. So I definitely think that it was an awesome experience. Thing with UofT is that it's pass fail. So I wasn't stressed about oh my God, like I have to score really, really well and be competitive with my GPA, because there's no such thing. As long as you pass, you get a 70% or more, sometimes 60%, you're good to go. So it's honestly academic wise, once you're into medical school, they take great care of you. And if you're having academic struggles, there's so many people that you can reach out to, and you're bound to fail some tests, but there's a lot of support, and it's much less stressful than undergrad in terms of academics, for sure.
Yeah, and as you said, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the med school you go to specifically. So, like, how's the culture around U of T, and what are like the types of opportunities that you get being at such a prestigious school compared to some of these other schools?
For sure. I think U of T, as you mentioned, is one of the best schools. So it has a lot to offer, a lot of different opportunities. So first of all, it has a lot of clinical opportunities. It has some of the biggest hospitals. So you can, no matter what you're interested in, what field, what specific niche you want, Toronto has it. Whereas a lot of different schools don't have that clinical, broad clinical exposure that U of T does. So that's one thing. It's huge on research. If you get passionate about that, that's awesome. A lot of mentorship and a lot of medical education as well, with that as medical students you can get involved with. So it's great in that sense. The other amazing thing about U of T is that the faculty really take care of you. They the support that you get from academic coaching, and there's a office called OFSA, which it's like anytime you have any mental stress or you're going through a lot, you can always talk to them. They're like really friendly if you're stressed out about applying to residency or just didn't do so well on an exam. You can always reach out to them. I think everybody in the class has met with the OFSA staff at least a few times. So they're very supportive, and so it has both a balance of very supportive and making you feel included, and at the same time having the perfect opportunities for you to grow in all dimensions to make you competitive for residency, which is the next step.
Getting into med school is already a very hard thing to do in Canada, and one of the harder programs to get into is something called MD-PhD. And just because you mentioned research, I wanted to bring that up. So I'm not sure how the students from MD-PhD study. So do they study with the cohort that is studying that are working towards their MD, or is it the ones who are just strictly just focused on their research first?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I did the MD program myself, but I do have a few friends in the MD PhD program at UofT, which is an amazing program if you're interested in research. Um, the way it works is generally you do 1 year of your MD program, and then you finish your 1 to 2 years, so either 1 year or 2 years. Then you do your PhD for 5 years or however long it takes. On average, I think it's 5, and then you come back and you finish third and fourth year. So the clerkship part. So you get that clinical experience in third and fourth year, which is called clerkship, and then you move on to residency. And if you're interested in research, that's certainly a great time to do it. Um, some people are not sure whether or not they want research that early in their training, because PhD obviously it's 5 years away from medical school, so it is a long time. But a lot of people realize after doing a little bit more clinical research, because a lot of people do basic science research in undergrad, and they may not know exactly what stream they want. But what I've heard from other people they find useful is that first deciding their specialty of choice, and using medical school to decide that, and then doing a PhD in a specific field that they're interested in, right? As opposed to some people do know right off the bat from undergrad what they really want to do their PhD in, which is fair. Um, so either way, like people either do a PhD through the MD PhD program or afterwards, if they're really interested in research, like during residency, there's opportunities to do that as well, or after residency during fellowship.
So
Yeah.
on the topic of research, what are some of your personal research interests, and how have they, changed over time since you've gained so much exposure to the medical school curriculum and even your experiences in medical school overall?
Yeah, that's a good question. For me, my research experience has evolved over time quite a bit, and it's still evolving. I wouldn't say I know exactly what I want just yet. And that's why I think medical school is awesome for you to be able to experience different types of research. So initially in my undergrad, I did a lot of basic science. I did some plant meiosis research with one of the professors at UTSC. I did a neuroscience project as well with a professor there, and overall, I felt that it was interesting, but I couldn't see myself doing it for too long, like as a career path in and of itself. I wanted to maybe integrate a bit of research, but I really didn't see the utility in, like I felt like a piece was missing. And I realized that when I started to do clinical research, where I was looking directly at patient outcomes, I was able to see the impact during my rotations. So when I was doing like my clerkship rotations through like internal medicine or whatever other field, I I was able to see that we use research to kind of determine what type of treatment someone is going to get, or what the prognosis means for a specific condition, how long do they have to live, and all of that. And so being able to see it from a clinical side and being involved with clinical research, which I'm doing kind of right now in medical school, um, that I think was really powerful for me, and it opened my eyes that there's different types of research as well. So I'm still learning about trying to decide what specific specialty I want to go into, and so I want to do research in that field. So I'm still taking time to decide that, but I've definitely decided that clinical research is the way to go for me.
And you mentioned all of these twists and turns that you have had in your research
Mhm.
career, and you've also mentioned how you were like an all-rounded applicant as when you were going into med school. So, Why was it medicine that you chose if you had all these other options around you? What was your main motivation, and when did you really like figure that out?
Yeah. So honestly, some people, like the moment they're born, or they say like they already know that they want to go into medical school. And for me, it wasn't like that at all. I've always been someone who's enjoyed almost everything, like in terms of science. Like I enjoyed biology, chemistry, and physics, as weird as that sounds. I enjoyed math as well. So I initially thought like I would do something in engineering in my high school, but then I ended up going into science, which I thought was the best decision ever. And then within science, so I have two older sisters. Um, Both of them are in the States right now, but one is a pharmacist and one is a dentist. And they were both like very supportive because they were in that medical field as well. Um, my my sister really wanted me to go into dentistry. She's like, "Oh, it's the best career. It's nice and short, and you can easily get it done." And I was considering that for a very long time, but it was after my second year of undergrad um, when I realized that like I couldn't see myself um, being in other people's mouths all the time and doing dentistry per se, even though it's a great field. Um, I ended up studying for my MCAT, and it was when I was studying for the content and like just trying to envision my future. Um, I That's when I realized that I'll go for medicine. Like I think I was also scared. I was also scared of not being able to get in, if I'm being completely honest. I was like, oh, like medical school, it sounds so hard. Like you have to give the MCAT, um, you have to do all of these extracurriculars that apply. Like I've heard a lot of people not getting in. Like I don't know if I can do it. And then because of some of my friends who were studying for the MCAT, I was like, okay, you know what? Let me just try it. And so I started studying for the MCAT. I'm like, okay, if I'm doing this, I'm going to go all in. And it was after that, I was like, okay, I'm going to put my best foot forward. And I got even more involved through teaching, research as much as I could while maintaining a good GPA. And then I was like, okay, I'm definitely going to pursue or at least try for it. And luckily things worked out. And I do think that luck does play a role, um, but to keep trying. And if things don't work out one year, it's all good. Like you can always try again, and drawbacks are make you stronger. So yeah, that's I think after second year was when I kind of solidified that I wanted to do medicine.
And to speak more on sort of your passion, your desire to actually go to medical school, I've heard of a lot of people having this thing called like imposter syndrome, where they get into medical school, they see these like amazing qualified applicants with like numerous publications, like just entering into the same year as them and studying the same content as them. Did you ever feel sort of like feeling like that, like imposter syndrome? Have you ever felt that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually feel it all the time, and I think a lot of like med students do. They they're surrounded by excellence. Like obviously, getting into medical school is not. It is competitive for sure. So around you, you'll see applicants that are like top 20 under 20 in all of Canada, and people who've had such amazing accomplishments. Um, and maybe not under 20, obviously under 30, um, but they've accomplished so much, whether it be through research or through like global health, and some of them are really smart, like where they read one thing and they know it right away. I have a friend who has a condition called hyperthymesia, where he remembers every little date, everything. Like if you ask him like what happened in 2017 of April 20th, he'll tell you exactly what he was doing at that time. And I'm just like, how do I compare with people like that? Like sure, I may have been able to get into medical school, but I'm not like some genius. I still have to work hard in order to get good grades, in order to perform well in school as well as get involved and put my best foot forward. Whereas with other people, it might come a little bit more naturally. So I definitely think imposter syndrome is part of the game. We're going to feel that. If we don't feel that in medical school, if we feel like, no, we're very capable, we're strong, then we might feel that afterwards in residency. And if not, like eventually in our life, we will feel like we are maybe not the best. Like I think in high school, we're used to being one of the top students. And then in undergrad, things may simmer down a little bit. But as you go forward, I think it's humbling to not be the one who's always at the top, right? And you have to realize that there will be people that have other strengths that you might not, but you also shouldn't let that affect your confidence as well. Like just because another person has accomplished a lot and you feel inferior in some way through the imposter syndrome, you have a lot of strengths yourself as well, and to not sell yourself short. So I think balancing those two things is very important. But to answer your question, yeah, I think it's a very common phenomenon with medical students. And I'm sure it's common elsewhere as well.
Going back to the support that you got from your sisters and their accomplishments in the field of medicine in the States, did you ever consider applying to the States? And did you apply to the States?
Yeah, so I applied to the States as well. I applied to Canada and the US. My immediate family is in Canada, but I have a lot of extended family in the States, and I've just heard like, oh, obviously there's a lot of schools, a lot of opportunity in the States. And so I did apply. I applied not too many programs, and I did get into one of the schools in the US, but I didn't end up going there because UofT obviously was a great school here, and I decided to just stay here. My family was here, and it was the easier option, as well as the tuition in the States was very, very expensive. So I did apply to the States, but I didn't end up going there. What I would recommend if you're thinking of applying to the States or Canada or to whatever school it might be, I want to recommend that try to work on the application to the best degree possible. For me, I feel like I rushed my US application quite a lot. I was just like, okay, let me just apply for the sake of it kind of thing. And I didn't really work too hard on my personal statements or getting my letters of reference and putting in my activities and all of that. Like, I feel like if you do want to apply somewhere, go for it. But it's not just about your MCAT and your GPA. The application is a very, very important part. How you describe yourself, how you present yourself, your activities is a huge part of the game. And so if you're applying broadly, then I would say try to do a good job. Whether it's your first choice, definitely do the best job possible for like your first few options. But if you want to have a good chance, just remember that the application is also speaks wonders, volumes, and it's very important.
So how long did you actually spend on making the application? Because I know that you have to take the MCAT the same year. So it like conflicts a lot. And was that in your third year or did you take it earlier?
Yeah, so you're right. Like it's all at the same time, so it's kind of challenging. I took the MCAT twice, and I think on average, most people probably take the MCAT around twice, sometimes more. Some people only take it once. I took the MCAT first between my second and third year, and then again between my third and fourth year. And I do recommend taking it early, first of all, just so that you get some exposure. Obviously, if you get a great score the first time around, that's awesome. But just knowing that sometimes you might not. For me, it was cars that I struggled with a lot. I'm sure a lot of people can resonate if you guys have studied for it. Yeah. So I had to give it again, and I tried to time it in a way where, because I had already given it once, I didn't have to study as much for it the second time. I just had to do a lot of practice for a card. So I gave it early in August, and I focused on my applications immediately after that for Canadian for sure. But the tough part was US, because US applications are rolling basis. And so the earlier you apply, the better it is. So that part was tough because I was trying to do my applications while also studying for the MCAT. And I think if I had some recommendations around that, I would say it would be to start early for your US applications if you are thinking of applying there. Because for MCAT, I know it's probably hard to start studying early for the MCAT, given that you're probably in school. But either way, just start early for both, and that's kind of the only way around it. If you're not applying to the States, then I think it's certainly possible to give your MCAT, like there's no hard and fast rule. Some people like to give it in September, but I just feel that if you try to give it a little bit earlier, maybe in August sometime, then it leaves you time to work on your application, which is a significant portion of your application as well.
Harsh, from the way you're talking about Canadian and American applications to medical school, they seem to be pretty different. So, what are the differences to what you can speak about the application? What are some of the differences there are between the Canadian and American applications?
Yeah, so US versus Canada. So the American application is definitely more intensive than the Canadian application. So it requires two parts. So there's a primary application, which you send to all of the schools. And then when you get invites to different schools, they send you an invitation for a secondary application, which asks you very specific questions there too. So that's why US is definitely more intensive. For your primary, you have to write a whole personal statement about why you want to go into medical school. And then the rest of it, of the primary application, is similar to Canada, where you need like reference letters, you need to talk about your activities. And then for your secondary applications, for each school, you have to write, why do you want to come to our medical school? What strengths do you have? And so that gets tiring. And for me, like, I was doing all of that while studying for my MCAT. So as you can imagine, it's a lot to handle on your plate. So definitely try to space that out, try to start early for sure. And then comparing that to Canada, Canada is much more straightforward. You need all of your other external supplementary stuff like your MCAT, your GPA, your reference letters. But then in your application, you just have to quickly, briefly describe each activity. You have very few characters, like 150 characters. I'm talking about Ontario, so OMSAS application. And then the only school that's asking for a lot is UofT. So UofT, you got to write 7 additional essays. Those were the worst. So they ask 4 specific questions that you have to answer to the best of your abilities. And then you have to elaborate on 3 items from your ABS, or your autobiographical sketch. So yeah, and I think they do weigh all of this together, like how you write in your ABS elaborations for each of the 3 activities. That definitely matters. In your 4 essays, yeah, you want to talk about your experiences. You want to answer the question well, because they do consider all of these parts of your application. And I think Canada really looks at CanMed's roles. So you should really try to focus on those throughout your application. But anyway, those are the main differences between the Canadian and the US applications.
For the UofT essays, I'm assuming you did them after the MCAT, after you took the MCAT. So,
Yeah.
So how long did you spend on the 7 extensive essays?
I don't remember exactly how long I spent right now, but I know I didn't just rush it and do it like in the final week or something. I tried to start a bit early. Maybe around 2 weeks should be a good amount of time, maybe, where you like go through it, write it on your own, and then get some friends or somebody you know from medical school to kind of look through it. I think being happy with it yourself is the first step. Try to make it personal. Try to make it about yourself, and try to, like, there's no formula, but try to match the CanMeds rules. Generally, each of the paragraphs is looking for one or two of the CanMeds roles, which are like leadership, collaboration, communication, health advocacy, scholarly, all of those things. So try to hit those. I think UofT calls it clusters actually, but then it's part of the CanMeds role. So definitely go for that. Having been a filed reviewer myself, I know that that's really what they care about, is those CanMeds roles. So certainly try to address that and ask your peers. It doesn't have to be someone from medical school, but someone else who knows you well as well, to see how you're writing, and try to be unique as much as you can, but no pressure there.
And since you're part of your clerkship is going on right now, and your match is probably coming up soon for your residency, have you decided what specialty you want to go
Yeah.
into?
Yeah, we actually just applied for CARMS, it's called CARMS, Canadian Residency Matching Service. And I just applied yesterday. It was the deadline. So it's definitely a big step. Like, we submitted our applications and we had to write personal statements for all of the schools that we wanted to apply to. Some people applied to multiple programs. I applied to internal medicine, and I've applied to internal medicine across Canada. So hoping for the best there. I kind of decided that that's my specialty of choice. In my second year of medical school, I really liked like the cerebral aspect of it, like thinking, the pathophysiology, always asking the why and the how things happen. It's kind of like you see Dr. House solving all of these like diagnostic dilemmas, and I really enjoyed like taking some time to think through things, and so that's why internal medicine really spoke to me, and I'm applying within that, and we'll see how it goes. Some people apply to multiple programs and back up with a program that's maybe less competitive, and so in that scenario, they have to write applications and essays, personal statements for both fields, and it's quite challenging. And you also have to do electives in our fourth year, where we choose what specialty we want to do our electives in, and we have to kind of balance that, show that we're interested in internal, but also back up maybe with family medicine or whatever it might be. So you have to kind of choose what you want to apply to, and go from there. For me, it's internal, so we'll see. We'll find out. So we applied yesterday. We get interviews throughout March, and then we find out big match day, it's called, is on April 20th of this year. So
kind of like
that'll be
draft
the
day.
day. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, fingers crossed that everything goes well for you.
Thank you.
And that brings me to another question that I had. You've talked about how sort of this process of finding a match is so like stressful, and you've got to write a lot of personal statements for your application. So in general, when you were, I guess, cruising or breezing through med school, what was your day like? How did you organize your day? Did you have a specific morning routine? Just stuff like that.
Yeah, sure. So throughout medical school, I guess the first 2 years and the last 2 years are very, very different. Like, first 2 years are called pre-clerkship, where most of our learning happens more in the classroom, even though UofT's curriculum only has 3 hours per week of like in-class lecture. It has a bunch of other like case-based learning and all these things. But it's more in the classroom and less hospital. But then third and fourth year are completely, you're doing rotations in the hospital. So certainly very, very drastically different. During the first 2 years, I would spend my days, I'm generally more of a night owl, so I like to sleep in a little bit, unless we have like anatomy labs in the morning. So maybe wake up at, I don't know, I'm just approximating here, like 10 o'clock or so, like watch some lectures, learn a little bit, and then depending on the day, like we have different activities, but every Friday we would generally have exams, so I would study for that, and then do certain extracurriculars, whether that's getting involved with research or doing a little bit of mentorship, or just getting involved in the community, advocacy, things like that. I think because things are pass fail, it's not as stressful academically to do really well, even though sometimes passing is challenging too. Like you definitely have to study, but it's not like, I think I can compare it to the US, where in the US, your step 1 and step 2 scores, which are like the USMLE exams, they matter so much that your first 2 years you just spend studying. Whereas here, it's not like that. Like you have to get involved and show that you're an all-rounded personality, kind of like similar to how you got into medical school. So a little bit of that continues on. But that's typically my day. But more so in clerkship, I think my day generally consists of like waking up early at like 6 or 7, sometimes 5, depending on the rotation that you're on. But being at work from like 8 to 5, maybe approximately, sometimes a little bit later. Then coming home, you're exhausted from work. You have to read around your cases generally in order to, first of all, know what's going on in the rotation, and second of all, to do a good job, because at the end of the day, you want reference letters from these staff that you're working with at the hospital. And so you want to impress them. You want to have your clinical knowledge at a certain level. And so it's important that you try to read around cases, and then you come home, you're exhausted, and you have to work on like personal statements, for me, let's say for CARMs right now. So I think clerkship is a really, really stressful time. Whether you're coming home and studying for your exams, which we have all throughout third year, or coming home in your fourth year and working on your personal statements, you're trying to do a good job in your electives and all that to get letters. So throughout clerkship, I think it's a busier time, and I would generally sleep a little bit later too. So I would get like 6 hours of sleep a day. So yeah, certainly that's generally typically what my day is like.
Yeah, so we're all aware that like your medical journey takes up basically most of your time in the day, and I know that you can incorporate basically anything into your medical journey. Like in our last episode, we had Mark Mackey, who was a professional football player in the Canadian Football League, and he got accepted into Western Medical School, and he actually ended up pursuing medicine after. So what's something that you do outside of I guess strictly medicine right now?
Yeah.
Currently?
That's a great question. And I think it's really important to have something outside of medicine that you enjoy doing, whatever it might be. For me, it's not anything like professional football. That's on another scale. I have a few hobbies that I like. So a few things. So I play the tabla. That's a musical instrument. It's a percussion instrument. So I took training for that for a few years. So I do enjoy that quite a bit. I enjoy dance as well in the same realm, like Bhangra dance. Like we have a few competitions, and so I definitely enjoy that. Hanging out with my friends is of course, like who wouldn't like that? But I think me and my friends, like I've known them for a very long time, since like elementary school, and we've been really, really tight. So like hanging out with them is always a good time with family. And getting involved with culture as well, I think is a huge part of my life that I value a lot, family and culture. So those are things that I like. I don't have anything like Mark, the CFL player. I do enjoy athletics as well, like ultimate frisbee. I was part of the ultimate frisbee team, and both in high school and undergrad as well. And we competed there, and I really loved that too. So certainly a little bit of sports and a little bit of family and friends.
This was just a random thing that goes between me, Rushil, and Nimit, which is that you brought up that you're still close with their elementary friends. So we're all going into medicine, and it's just a thought that so we're in the same university. So if we do end up going into the same medical school, I think that would be very cool. But the chances for that would probably be very low.
Yeah, I think eventually, like it would be great to always be together, but eventually we are friends. We might separate in terms of proximity to each other, but obviously we can always stay connected through other means. But yeah, for sure, man. I feel that because I used to live in Scarborough. I've been in Scarborough my whole life, and then I moved downtown. It's a little bit further away, but obviously it's nothing too far. But yeah, you never know where life takes you.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess that brings us to the end of our episode with you, Harsh. I'd like to thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your experiences with us that you had throughout undergrad and throughout medical school. And again, we wish you the best of luck with your residency match. And I'm sure that based on everything that you've said so far and based on everything that you've done so far, that things will definitely work out in your favor. So Harsh, do you have any last words for us?
I just want to say thank you guys for having me as well. I appreciate it. And I hope you guys learned a little bit through this. Feel free to reach out to me if you guys have any other personal questions. I just want to say at the end that don't worry, like take it easy. Don't put too much pressure on yourself for anything. I think what I've learned over the years is that you might not get everything you want in life, but that's okay, because at the end of the day, you'll be happy at the end. Like whether or not you wanted whether it's something in your career or something else in your life. Like I think when you face hardships and you may not get what you want, like definitely try your best, but you really become strong when you face adversity and you face a little bit of struggles, and that's when you really realize what life really means. And so don't worry at all. Don't put pressure on yourself. Just try your best, and things will, I'm sure, work out, whether it's the way you imagined or a different path. In the end, the destination will be great, but it's the journey that you take that might be a little bit different than you may have anticipated.
Thank you for that wisdom you've imparted to us, Harsh. And to the viewers watching,